She planned the perfect proposal. Instead, she walked in on the perfect betrayal. 3 years, every sacrifice, every silent compromise, every dream she folded up and put away, all of it building toward one moment. And in 60 seconds, standing in a doorway that smelled of ocean salt and someone else's perfume, Evelyn Cross watched it all burn. If you've ever loved someone so completely you forgot to keep anything for yourself, stay. This story is for you. The morning started the way most catastrophic mornings do. Quietly, deceptively ordinary. The kind of morning that gives no warning before it takes everything. Evelyn was up before 5. She always was. Old habit from the group home years when the early hours belonged only to her. Before the noise started, before the older kids got to the bathroom first, before the particular loneliness of shared space settled in like weather, she'd learned to love the dark before dawn. It was the only time nothing was required of her. She stood at the window of their apartment on the 12th floor with a mug of coffee she hadn't tasted yet, looking out at the city below. The streets were still wet from last night's rain. Headlights moved slow and careful across the pavement. Everything looked clean from this height. Everything always looked cleaner from a distance. Today was the day. She turned from the window and looked at the small velvet box sitting on the kitchen counter. She'd bought it 3 weeks ago from a jeweler on Price Street, a tiny shop run by an old man who didn't ask questions. Inside the box was a ring, a man's ring, white gold, simple band with a single row of black diamonds along the setting. She'd had the inside engraved. "Everything I have, you already have." 12 words. She'd rewritten it 40 times before settling on those. Logan was still asleep in the bedroom. She could hear him through the wall, the low, even breathing that used to make her feel safe. She'd loved that sound once, the way it anchored her to something real and steady when her own mind ran too fast. 3 years of waking up to that sound. 3 years of building a life around someone else's rhythms. She pulled on her coat and picked up the velvet box and the folder sitting beside it. Inside the folder were the confirmation papers for the Meridian Suite at the Clairlock Resort, a private seaside room she'd booked 6 weeks ago and paid for herself out of her own savings. She'd ordered flowers, had the staff arrange the furniture, and had written a letter she planned to read out loud if she could get through it without her voice breaking. Logan's mother had called her pathetic once in a moment she wasn't supposed to overhear. That girl has no family, no name, no real future. She latches on because she has nothing else. Evelyn had stood in the hallway outside the dining room and pressed her back against the cold wall and breathed through it. She'd gotten very good at breathing through things. The drive to Clairlock took 40 minutes. She drove with the radio off, rehearsing in her head what she would say. She'd already called his assistant and blocked Logan's afternoon calendar. She texted Vanessa last night. "Don't make plans with him today. I have something special." And Vanessa had responded with a string of exclamation points and a heart emoji, which was Vanessa's entire emotional range. They'd been friends since university, 14 years. Vanessa Reed, who was loud and beautiful and terrible with money and borrowed everything Evelyn owned without asking, who cried at weddings but never at funerals, who had the kind of easy magnetism that made every room rearrange itself around her, and who had told Evelyn more than once that she was the most talented designer she'd ever seen. Evelyn had believed her. She'd believed a lot of things. The resort came into view around a bend in the coastal road, white stone and glass set against gray water. The kind of place that existed to make money feel effortless. The valet took her car. The lobby smelled of gardenias, and she followed the familiar path to the east wing without stopping at the desk because she'd done a walkthrough last week and memorized every turn. She was early. That was the plan. Get there first. Make sure everything was right. Be standing in the room when Logan arrived so she could see his face the moment he walked in. She was halfway down the corridor toward the Meridian Suite when she heard it. A voice low, familiar, in a way that moved through her body before her brain caught up. She stopped walking. The corridor was empty except for her, the thick carpet absorbing all sound except what leaked through the door to her left. A door that was not quite latched. A door that opened 3 inches into a sitting room that faced the water. She didn't think. She pushed it open. For a moment, she couldn't organize what she was seeing. The brain does that. Refuses to assemble the obvious picture when the picture is too wrong, too specific, a kind of wrong, too targeted at the exact coordinates of everything you trusted. She saw the room, which was similar to the one she'd booked, but not identical. She saw the window, the water beyond it, the light on the water. She saw Logan. She saw Vanessa. She stood in the doorway with the velvet box in her hand and the folder pressed against her chest. And neither of them saw her at first because they were too occupied with each other, in the way that people are when they believe they are entirely alone. It was Vanessa who turned first, and the expression that crossed her face, Evelyn had replayed it 10,000 times since. In the weeks that followed, it was not guilt. It was closer to annoyance. The look of someone interrupted in the middle of something they were enjoying. Logan followed Vanessa's eyes and found Evelyn in the doorway. He straightened. He didn't move toward her. He stood with his shirt half open and looked at Evelyn, the way people look at an inconvenient piece of furniture they keep meaning to move. Evelyn said nothing. She could not locate her voice. It was somewhere behind her sternum, underneath the weight that had just settled there like concrete. Eve, Logan said. Just her name. No other words attached to it. No apology, no shock, no desperate reach for explanation. Just her name, flat as pavement. Vanessa pulled a robe from the back of a chair and wrapped it around herself and had the remarkable composure to say, "Maybe we should all sit down." Something broke open in Evelyn's chest, but it wasn't the kind that produces tears. It was drier than that, harder, the kind of break that produces a sound like a joint cracking in cold weather. "How long?" Evelyn said. Logan glanced at Vanessa, a quick glance, a calculation, a permission-seeking reflex. Even in this moment, even now. "That doesn't matter," he said. "How long, Evelyn? Answer me." He exhaled through his nose. The same exhale she'd watched him use in business meetings when someone asked a question he considered beneath him. 8 months, he said. The number arrived like a physical object. 8 months. She thought about 8 months ago. She'd been working 70-hour weeks, helping him prepare the Ashford fashion line presentation. She'd rewritten his entire brand concept. She had scrapped her own portfolio submission to the Gareth Lane International Competition because she ran out of time. 8 months ago, she had given up the one professional opportunity that could have changed her life. And during those same 8 months, Logan had been here. She looked at the room. She looked at Vanessa. She looked at the man she had planned to propose to in approximately 45 minutes. "Get out," Logan said. She heard it wrong at first, or she heard it right and couldn't believe it. "I'm sorry. You shouldn't have come here." He picked up his jacket from the arm of the chair. His voice had gone to a register she recognized. The one he used when he was performing authority, he didn't actually feel. "You always push too hard, Evelyn. You've always been too much, too intense, too emotional." Logan, Vanessa touched his arm. He shook it off, and something in him seemed to crack open too, but not in the same way. It cracked open like a door kicked off its hinges, like something that had been held shut for a long time and was now finally relieved to be open. "You want to know the truth? Fine. You want the whole thing. Logan, don't." "She deserves to know," he said to Vanessa, and even now there was something almost gentle in his voice toward Vanessa. Not toward Evelyn. The gentleness was not for her. He looked at Evelyn with the ease of a man who has already made peace with something and is now only waiting for the other person to catch up. "I stayed because of the inheritance," he said. "Your grandmother's estate, the trust that vests when you turn 30. You're what, 5 months out?" A pause. "I needed the Ashford line to get off the ground before I walked, and I needed the access your family name could give me. What's left of it?" A pause. "You don't have family. You don't have connections. You don't have a reputation in this industry. You have a grandmother's trust fund and a talent you've never had the courage to use properly. I wasn't going to wait around while you figured out how to stop being small." Evelyn's hands had gone cold. The velvet box in her palm felt obscene now, ridiculous. A prop from a different story entirely. "The worst part," Logan said, and he actually looked sad for a moment. The performed sadness of someone who has rehearsed this scene, who has played it in the mirror and chosen the expression most likely to make them the reasonable one. "The worst part is that you'll be fine. You always land on your feet. Orphans learn that, don't you? You survive. That's what you do. That's what you... She had no memory of throwing the velvet box. She only knew that one moment she was holding it, and the next it was on the floor between them, and the sound it made, hitting the marble, wasn't as satisfying as it should have been. Logan looked at it. He didn't flinch. Evelyn walked out of the room. She walked down the corridor and through the lobby, and the valet brought her car back around without her asking, and she sat in the driver's seat with her hands on the wheel and didn't start the engine for a long time. The folder was still on the passenger seat, the papers with the reservation confirmation, the letter she'd written. She didn't look at it. Orphans learn. That's what you do. She started the engine and drove. She had no destination. She drove the coastal road south because north meant the city, and the city meant the apartment. And the apartment meant every physical artifact of the last 3 years. His razor on the bathroom shelf, his name on the mailbox, the photograph on the refrigerator that Vanessa had taken of the two of them in Lisbon the previous spring. Vanessa had taken it. She drove until the road narrowed and the water came close on her right, and then she pulled over onto a gravel shoulder and turned the engine off and sat in the silence with the sound of the ocean filling the car through the gap in the window. She hadn't noticed was open. She was not crying. She noticed this with a distant clinical curiosity. She had expected to cry. She had always been someone who cried easily privately in bathrooms and in cars when she was alone. The kind of crying that had no audience and made no demands. She had cried after meetings where executives dismissed her work. She had cried the night she turned 22 and no one called. She had cried quietly in the hallway outside the Ashford dining room while Logan's mother called her pathetic. She didn't cry now. The loss was too large. It occupied a different register entirely. She was sitting there 1 minute, 5 minutes. She couldn't tell. When she heard the footsteps on the gravel behind the car, she checked the mirror. A man was walking from the direction of a vehicle parked further down the shoulder. A dark car she hadn't noticed when she pulled over. The man was tall, wearing a dark overcoat. He walked without hurry, but with a particular precision to each step that had nothing casual in it. She didn't know why she registered that. She registered it anyway. He stopped at the passenger window. She rolled it down, not because she felt safe, but because the numbness had reached a depth where caution felt optional. He bent slightly to look in at her. He was older than Logan, mid-40s, she guessed, though his face made age feel irrelevant. The kind of face that had been handsome before, something had pressed it into something else. Not ugly, just carved. High cheekbones and a mouth that looked like it had not smiled recently or often. Dark eyes with almost no warmth in them, though she had the strange impression he was not being unkind. "You've been parked here for 11 minutes, he said. "Is that a law?" "No." "Then I recognized your car," he said. "I was behind you on the coast road. You were driving too fast, and then you stopped too suddenly." She looked at him. "Do I know you?" He studied her for a moment. Something moved across his face. Recognition of a different kind arriving from a different direction. "No," he said, "but I know who you are. You're Logan Ashford's fiancé." The word hit like a slap. Fiance. Past tense, present tense, no tense at all. "I was," she said. The man said nothing. He seemed comfortable with silence. Most people weren't. They filled it immediately, anxious to smooth over any gap. This man simply let the silence sit between them and seemed in no hurry to close it. "His uncle," she said. "You're his uncle." It came to her not as memory but as pattern. The shape of the face, the structure around the eyes that was the same structural type as Logan's. But stripped of everything, Logan used to make himself appealing. Logan was a copy made from the same raw material by a more careless hand. Damien Morrow, he said. She had heard the name. Everyone in the industry had heard it. Damien Morrow, the reclusive billionaire, the businessman who built the Morrow Group into one of the largest private investment firms in Europe and North America without ever giving an interview or appearing in a feature article. The man that fashion industry insiders mentioned in the same breath as power without ever specifying what kind. She'd been at Logan's family dinners for 3 years and had never once been in the same room as this man. "He doesn't talk about you," she said. "No, Damien said he wouldn't." "Why are you here?" "I had a meeting at Clairlock this morning." A pause. I saw you in the lobby. I saw you walk to the East Wing. I saw you come back out. He said this without embellishment. You left very quickly. I had enough reasons to. He straightened and looked out at the water for a moment. She watched him rather than the water. There was something about his stillness that was unusual, not peace. She didn't think this man had peace. It was something else. Containment, the stillness of something that moved enormously on the inside and had spent decades learning not to show it. I know what Logan did, Damien said. He turned back to the window. Not today. In general, I have known for some time. Then why? Because he's not my responsibility. A flat statement delivered without apology. He's my sister's son. That's not the same thing. His eyes moved to the folder on the passenger seat. What's in there? She didn't answer. A proposal, she said finally. I was going to ask him. A pause. I had a ring. Something passed through Damien Morrow's eyes. It was brief and it was mostly dark, but there was one element to it she couldn't name. Not pity. She would have noticed pity immediately and would have shut the window. 7 years ago. He said, you were a student. You were at the Ferone Gallery opening, the parking structure on Calmont Street. She stared at him. There was a man, he said, following me. I was moving toward my car. You were coming the other direction and you stopped. You shouted loud enough that the security cameras picked it up. The man ran. She sat very still. The memory was distant, but it was there. A dark parking structure late evening. A student event she'd stayed too long at. A woman had lost her dog 2 levels down, and Evelyn had been helping her look, and then she'd been alone in the stairwell, and she'd seen something that felt wrong. 2 men, one cornered, one with bad intentions, telegraphed in every line of his body. And she had done the thing she always did when she saw wrong things, which was make noise. She had not known who the cornered man was. She had not waited to find out. She'd shouted. The aggressor had flinched and run, and she had walked quickly to her car and driven away because she was 23 and didn't want any more information than she already had. That was you, she said. Yes, you were. I was having a complicated year. He didn't explain further. She looked at him for a long moment. The ocean moved behind him. The wind off the water was cold, and she was underdressed, and she hadn't noticed until now. What do you want? She asked. Damien Morrow put one hand on the roof of the car and looked at her with the directness of someone who had spent a lifetime calculating odds before speaking. I want to offer you a proposal, he said, since you had one prepared. She blinked. I don't, she started. Marry me, he said. It came out the way orders come out from people who are not accustomed to having them refused. Not a question, not a plea, a proposition put forward by someone who had already modeled the relevant variables and arrived at a conclusion. The silence that followed was the longest of Evelyn's life. You're not serious, she said. I don't make jokes. You don't know me. I know enough. We have never spoken a single word to each other before this moment. I owe you a debt, he said. I don't carry debts. It disturbs me. A pause. Logan will inherit everything from the Morrow family business structure unless there is a reason he should not. Your presence in my life would constitute such a reason. Another pause. In return, I can give you everything you've spent the last 3 years handing to someone who didn't deserve it. She should have driven away. She should have rolled up the window and started the engine and returned to the city and found a lawyer and a therapist in that order and rebuilt her life in sensible increments, the way sensible people do. She looked at the velvet box on the floor of the passenger side where it had rolled after she'd thrown it, and then apparently picked it back up and brought it with her without realizing. You want to take Logan's inheritance, she said. Yes, by marrying me, by making you my wife, which is not exactly the same thing. She looked up at him. What's the difference? He looked at her steadily. I don't explain things twice, he said. I'll explain it once. The Morrow family trust vests significant control to the family patriarch and his named spouse. Logan's eligibility depends on the patriarch's goodwill. My goodwill. If I have a wife, if I have you as my wife, it removes the necessity of Logan as succession placeholder, which removes the financial leverage he has been preparing to use against you. You know about the inheritance. I know everything about Logan's plans. His voice remained level without contempt or heat, just information, stated. He told my sister he was planning to end the engagement once the trust vested and transfer the funds into the Ashford Line operating account. She told me. She felt her stomach turn. Not at the information, at the fact that she wasn't surprised. That somewhere under the shock of the morning, she had already known this, had known it in the way you know things you refuse to examine. "Why would I trust you?" she asked. "I don't know who you are. I don't know what you do. You know enough to know that marrying me would destroy Logan's plans entirely," he said. "That's enough to make a decision. That's not enough to make this decision." He reached into his coat and produced a card and held it through the window. She looked at it. Plain white, a name and a number. No title, no company name. "Think about it for 3 days," he said. "If you call that number within 72 hours, I'll send someone to explain the specific terms." He paused. "If you don't call, I'll understand. I won't contact you again." She took the card. He straightened and walked back to his car. No farewell, no backward glance. He simply walked away from her, with the same measured, precise gait he'd arrived with, and got into the dark car and drove south down the coast road until she couldn't see him anymore. She sat on the gravel shoulder for another 20 minutes with Damien Marrow's card in one hand and the velvet box in the other. She drove home. The apartment was exactly as she'd left it that morning, which was not how it looked to her now. The morning felt like a foreign country. She stood in the doorway of her own home and looked at the life inside it. The life she'd been so careful to assemble, to maintain, to protect, and saw it the way you see a room after something irreversible has happened in it. Everything the same, everything different. She went to her drafting table. It was the one piece of furniture in the apartment that was entirely hers. A wide oak table set under the north-facing window, covered in sketches and samples and pinned-up color swatches, and 3 different notebooks all in use at once. She sat down at it now and put Damien's card in the top left corner of the table where she could see it. Then she opened the oldest notebook, the one that was mostly full, the one that went back to her university years, and she found the pages she was looking for, a collection of sketches, tightly rendered, a full bridal collection she'd designed at 24 as a class exercise, 14 pieces. The instructor had told her it was the most cohesive student work he'd seen in 11 years of teaching. She'd never showed it to anyone else. Logan had seen the notebook once and asked what it was, and she'd said old school stuff and closed it. She looked at the sketches for a long time. She picked up her phone. She did not call Damien's number. It was too soon for that. She was not impulsive enough, not broken enough to make a decision like this in the same afternoon as the morning she'd had. She was many things, but she was not reckless. She called her friend Claudette instead, who was the only person she trusted completely, who lived in a cluttered apartment in the fashion district and worked in textile procurement and had never met Logan because Evelyn had always kept that part of her life separate, which said something she was only now prepared to hear. Claudette answered on the second ring. "Hey, I need to tell you something," Evelyn said. "Okay. I'm going to say it fast because if I think about it too long, I won't say it at all. A breath. Logan has been cheating on me for 8 months with Vanessa. I walked in on them this morning at the Clairlock Resort, where I had gone to propose to him. He told me he only stayed with me for my grandmother's inheritance. And then a man named Damien Marrow stopped me on the coast road and asked me to marry him instead." Silence. "Say that last part again," Claudette said. "Which part?" "The Damien Marrow part. He said he owes me a debt. He wants to give me everything I sacrificed and take Logan's inheritance access away at the same time." A pause. "He gave me 72 hours to decide." Another silence longer. "Evelyn," Claudette said, "Damien Marrow." "Yes." "Do you know who he is? Do you know what people say about him?" She looked at the card on her drafting table. "Yes," she said. "I've heard things." "He's not." Claudette stopped. "He's not the kind of person you make a casual agreement with." "I know. If you go into business with that man, any kind of business, you don't come back from it unchanged." "I know." A pause. "But I'm not coming back from today unchanged either. And at least one of those options is on my terms." She could hear Claudette breathing on the other end of the line. "What are you going to do?" Claudette asked. Evelyn looked at the design sketches in the notebook, at the 14 bridal pieces she'd drawn at 24, and then folded away because there had always been something more urgent, some other demand, some other priority that was never actually hers. "I'm going to sleep on it," she said. "I'm going to sleep on it, and in the morning I'm going to see if I still feel the same way." She did sleep on it. 4 hours, which was all she managed. She woke at 3 in the morning with a clarity she hadn't asked for and hadn't expected. The cold, dry clarity of someone who has stripped away the last thing they were protecting and found they don't feel the way they thought they would. She had expected devastation. She found something closer to resolution. She made coffee. She sat at the drafting table. She opened the notebook to a clean page and drew, which was what she always did when she needed to think. She drew quickly without planning, letting the line come from wherever it came from. And what came out was the kind of dress you design when you are making a point. Structured, severe, impossible to ignore. Clean shoulders, a neckline that was confident rather than revealing. Something a woman would wear if she had decided something irrevocable and wanted the room to know it before she said a word. At 4 in the morning, she picked up her phone. She called the number on Damien Marrow's card. It rang twice. "I thought you'd wait longer than this," he said. No greeting. He'd been awake. "I need to know the specific terms," she said, "before I agree to anything. I'll send someone at 9 a.m. I need to know one thing first." A pause. "What do you actually expect from this? From me, not the legal arrangement. What do you actually expect?" The silence on the line was different from his silences in person. Slightly less contained, fractionally more human. "I expect nothing from you," he said. "That's not how I work. I'll give you what I promised. You'll give me what I need. What happens in between is something we'll figure out." She sat with that. "I'll be here at 9 a.m., she said. She ended the call and put the phone face down on the table and looked at the dress she'd drawn. Outside, the city was still dark. The streets were still wet. Nothing had changed yet, and everything had. She thought about Logan waking up tomorrow in whatever room he was in with Vanessa, probably relieved. The particular relief of a man who had been waiting to stop pretending. She thought about the 8 months, the portfolio submission she'd abandoned, the weeks of 60-hour workdays spent rescuing his presentation, his concepts, his version of a career she'd helped him build from the bones of ideas that were half hers to begin with. She thought about Damien Marrow standing in the cold on the gravel shoulder with his hand on the roof of her car, offering her something she couldn't fully see yet. At 9 in the morning, a man she'd never met knocked on her door. He was polite and precise and carried a leather folder with a set of documents inside. And he sat across from her at the kitchen table and explained the specific terms of what Damien Marrow was proposing in language that was both exact and surprisingly simple. She read every page twice. She signed on the last page. The man gathered the documents and thanked her and left. And Evelyn Cross sat alone in the apartment she was already planning to vacate and understood for the first time in 3 years that the life in front of her was not the one she had spent the last 3 years building. It was the one she had been drawing toward long before that, in notebooks and late-night sketches, in the hours before the rest of the world woke up in the private country of what she actually wanted, which she had learned very young to keep to herself. She was going to stop keeping it to herself. Somewhere across the city, Logan Ashford was waking up beside Vanessa Reed with no knowledge of what Evelyn had just signed. And in a building she hadn't been to yet, in an office she hadn't seen, Damien Marrow was sitting at a desk with a copy of the same documents and a phone call he was already preparing to make. She didn't know yet what kind of man she had just married. She didn't know what the marriage would cost her, or what it would build. She didn't know the shape of the world she was walking into. What she knew was the shape of the world she was walking out of, and she knew she was not walking back. She picked up the notebook. She turned to the page with the dress she'd drawn at 4 in the morning. She looked at it for a long moment, the clean shoulders, the confident neckline, the lines of something that had decided. Then she picked up a pencil and began to add detail outside. The city was fully awake now. The streets had dried. The sun had arrived at the particular angle it takes in late autumn, low and precise, coming through the window at her drafting table and laying a stripe of light across the page. She drew, and 3 miles away in the Ashford family law firm's offices, on the 40th floor of a glass tower, Logan Ashford's attorney was preparing a document Logan had commissioned 4 weeks ago, a legal instrument designed to redirect the proceeds of Evelyn's grandmother's trust upon vesting, contingent on a signature Logan had every expectation of obtaining within the next 5 months. He did not know he was already too late. He did not know the trust was no longer the most dangerous thing about Evelyn Cross. He did not know about the man she had called at 4 in the morning. He did not know about the signature on the last page of a leather folder that was already at this moment on its way back to Damien Morrow. He would find out, but not yet. For now, Logan Ashford was eating breakfast with Vanessa Reed and feeling for the first time in months entirely free. He had no idea what had just been set in motion. He had no idea at all. The documents had been filed before Logan finished his breakfast. Evelyn didn't know that part. Not the timing, not the exact mechanism, not the name of the attorney Damien used, or the specific court filing that quietly, irrevocably altered the legal landscape of the Morrow family trust structure. She learned it later in pieces, the way you learn most things that happen in rooms you're not in. What she knew that morning was simpler and more immediate. She had signed her name to something enormous, and the day was continuing anyway. Indifferent to the size of what she'd done, she vacated the apartment by noon. Not everything. She wasn't theatrical about it. Didn't make a production of leaving. She took her drafting table, her notebooks, her portfolio cases, 3 boxes of clothing, and the photograph of her grandmother that sat on the windowsill in the bedroom. She left Logan's razor on the bathroom shelf. She left the photograph from Lisbon. She left the furniture they'd chosen together at a showroom in the design district on a Sunday afternoon. 2 years ago, when things had felt, if not exactly good, then possible, she called a moving service. She loaded what she could herself while she waited. She didn't cry. Claudette had offered her floor for as long as needed, which Evelyn appreciated and declined. Damien's people had already arranged a temporary residence, a furnished apartment in a building she'd never heard of, in a quiet part of the city she didn't know well, on the 8th floor with north-facing windows and good light. She didn't ask how quickly it had been arranged. She was beginning to understand that with Damien Morrow, quickly was not the point. The point was that things were simply already done when you needed them. The new apartment was clean and impersonal, and smelled of fresh paint and nothing else. She stood in the center of it, with her drafting table not yet assembled, and her boxes stacked near the door, and felt the particular silence of a space with no history. She'd lived in spaces like this her whole childhood. She'd learned to tolerate them. She had never learned to like them. She built the drafting table herself. It took 2 hours, and she did it without instructions, from muscle memory. When it was done, she set it under the north window and sat in front of it, and opened the notebook to the dress she'd drawn at 4 in the morning, and kept drawing. Damien's first call came at 6 that evening. "How are you settled?" he asked. No preamble. "Fine." She had her pencil in her hand. She didn't put it down. "I need you to attend a dinner, Thursday. The Morrow family holds one every month. My sister hosts." A pause. "It will be the first time most of them see you in this context."
What context?
"As my wife." She set the pencil down. "Logan will be there," she said. "Yes. And Vanessa, possibly. She's been attending since she and Logan became." He stopped. Chose a different word. "Since they became public." Evelyn looked at the north window. The city was going dark outside it light by light. "Have you told anyone yet?" "No, I wanted your input on timing." She hadn't expected that. She was quiet for a moment, recalibrating. "Not Thursday," she said. "Let me come to the dinner as what? A guest, a business contact. Let me be in the room with them before they know. I want to see how they behave when they think I'm no one." The silence on his end was brief and assessing. "All right," he said. "Do you have a problem with that?" "No, it's strategic." "It's not strategic," she said. "It's personal." A pause. "I want to be honest with you about that." Another silence. "I appreciate the honesty," he said. "Thursday, 7 o'clock. I'll send a car." He ended the call before she could respond. She looked at the phone for a moment and then picked up the pencil. She drew until midnight. The Morrow family dinner was held in a house that was technically a manor, a late 19th century stone structure in the city's north quarter that had been renovated with enough money to be contemporary, without losing the density of the original architecture. Damien's sister, Renata Ashiford, had lived there for 20 years. Logan had grown up between this house and his father's apartment downtown, a fact Evelyn knew because Logan had told her about it early in their relationship when he was still performing accessibility, still showing her the rooms of himself he thought she'd find appealing. The car dropped her at the gate at 7. She wore a dress she'd modified herself from a base piece she'd found in the boxes, dark green, structured with a shoulder detail she'd added that afternoon using a needle and thread and about 40 minutes of focused attention. It was not the dress she'd drawn at 4 in the morning. That one was for something else, for a moment that hadn't arrived yet. This one was for a room full of people who were about to see her and decide instantly that she was irrelevant. She walked through the front door and into the noise and warmth of 30 people who had history with each other. The particular compressed energy of a family that gathers regularly and has long since run out of genuinely new things to say and compensates with volume. She saw Damien immediately. He was standing near the fireplace at the far end of the room with 2 men she didn't know. And he was not looking at her, was deliberately not looking at her. She understood which was a form of instruction. She read it correctly and moved to the drinks table and accepted a glass of something white and cold and positioned herself at the edge of a conversation about European textile import regulations that she could participate incredibly and without drawing attention. She did not see Logan for 11 minutes. She counted. He came in from the garden through the side doors, Vanessa's hand in his, and Evelyn had one moment to prepare herself before he crossed into her sightline. She was already in conversation, already turned at the right angle, already holding her glass with the ease of someone comfortable in rooms like this. She watched him from her peripheral vision and did not let her body change. Vanessa saw her first. It was a full-body reaction, a small, involuntary stutter in Vanessa's stride, a tightening of her grip on Logan's hand, a brightness in her eyes that was not warmth. Vanessa Reed had always been a person who performed surprise while experiencing calculation. She did it now. "Evelyn," she said, warm, wide smile. "The full performance. I had no idea you'd be here." Logan's face was harder to read. He'd had more practice. He composed himself in under 2 seconds and gave her the particular look she'd seen him give in convenient situations throughout their relationship. A look of controlled neutrality that was designed to suggest he'd already thought about this and wasn't concerned. "Evelyn," he said, "this is unexpected, is it?" She smiled. It was not a warm smile. She'd been practicing a different kind in the mirror that week. A smile with nothing vulnerable in it. The smile of someone who knows something you don't. She gave him that one. "I've been in touch with some people here professionally. Renata was kind enough to include me." Logan's eyes moved through the room to find Renata. A quick check, the instinct of someone tracking threats. He found her near the dining room entrance, deep in conversation with 2 women Evelyn didn't recognize. "You know Renata professionally," he said. "I'm getting to know her." She turned slightly toward the textile conversation she'd left. "Excuse me." She walked away from him. She felt him watching her. She did not look back. Vanessa caught up with her near the bookshelf at the room's east wall, away from the main cluster of guests. And Evelyn knew it was coming and turned to face her before Vanessa could arrange the angle she wanted. "You look amazing," Vanessa said, which was not what she wanted to say. "Really, you do. Thank you. I want to talk about what happened." Vanessa lowered her voice. The smile had softened into something she used in the register of sincerity. Something Evelyn had once believed in completely. "I know it was terrible and you're angry and you have every right to be. I've been sick about it. Have you?" "Evelyn, please." "I'm not here to fight with you, Vanessa," she said it quietly. "I'm not here because of you." Something shifted in Vanessa's eyes. A reassessment. She looked at Evelyn the way people look at someone when they realize they've been reading them wrong. Not with revelation, but with a re-narrowing. "Then why are you here?" "I told you professional reasons." Vanessa's gaze moved across the room and landed on Damien briefly before coming back to Evelyn. "Professional reasons with the Marrow family." "That's right." The silence between them had a different texture now. Vanessa smiled again, but the warmth had dropped out of it entirely. It was the surface of something else now. The veneer over a calculation Evelyn could see happening in real time. Good for you, Vanessa said. Really, she touched Evelyn's arm. A brief press. Fingers that communicated assessment rather than affection, and walked back toward Logan. Evelyn turned to the bookshelf and looked at the books without reading them, and let out a slow breath she hadn't been aware she was holding. You're doing well. Damien's voice close just below the ambient noise of the room. He'd moved to the shelf beside her with the soundlessness of someone who'd spent years moving through spaces without announcing himself. Was that a compliment? An observation. He kept his eyes forward on the room. Vanessa is more intelligent than Logan gives her credit for, I know. She kept her eyes forward, too. She's already suspicious of why I'm here. Of you. A pause. Of the two of those things together. She felt rather than saw him consider this. Let her be suspicious, he said. Suspicion without evidence is just discomfort. She'll look for evidence. She won't find it before I'm ready for her to. He moved away from her, then back into the room, and she let him go, and spent the rest of the dinner being precisely what she'd said she was, a professional contact of the family, pleasant and composed, and unremarkably present, offering nothing that could be used and taking in everything that was offered freely. Dinner itself was loud. The table sat 18, and Evelyn was placed between a man who ran logistics for the Morrow Group's European operations, and a woman she identified as Renata's college roommate, who had married into a shipping family and had opinions about everything. Evelyn listened more than she spoke. She ate and drank moderately and paid attention to the room's dynamics the way she'd been paying attention to rooms since she was 9 years old, when paying attention was the only advantage available to her. Logan was placed 6 seats down, diagonally visible across the table, Vanessa beside him. She watched them without looking directly at them, the way you watch something from the corner of a painting. Logan spoke too much at dinner. He always did. It was the social mechanism he used to manage anxiety, volume substituting for substance, a trait she'd found charming at first, and had learned to see clearly only from close proximity. He was telling a story about a recent trip to Milan, gesturing with his wine glass, and Vanessa was watching him with the focused attention of a woman who had decided on a project, and was still in the phase where the project excited her. Renata Marrow watched her brother's empty chair at the head of the table with an expression Evelyn couldn't fully decode. Damien had not sat at dinner. He disappeared from the room around 8 and had not returned. This apparently was not unusual. Renata's expression was tired rather than alarmed. After dinner in the sitting room, Renata found Evelyn. She was a smaller woman than Evelyn had expected, compact, economical, with the same structural intelligence around the eyes as Damien, but deployed differently. Where Damien's eyes withheld, Renata's calculated overtly. She sat beside Evelyn on a settee near the window and held her drink with both hands. My brother doesn't bring people to these dinners, she said. Not an accusation, a statement of available evidence. He didn't bring me, Evelyn said. I came through. I know what the cover story is. Renata's voice was matter of fact. She sipped her drink. I just said he doesn't bring people. He hasn't in a very long time. She studied Evelyn's face with the openness of someone not bothering to hide that she's studying it. How long have you known him? Not very long. And yet here you are. And yet. Renata was quiet for a moment. Logan thinks you're here to make him uncomfortable. Is he uncomfortable? The smallest smile. Yes. She set her glass down on the side table. Damien called me this week. He doesn't call unless he wants something, or wants me to know something. He didn't want anything from me. She paused. He wanted me to know something. Evelyn said nothing. He didn't tell me what, Renata said. He just called. We talked about nothing for 6 minutes, and then he said he'd be at dinner this month. Another pause. He hasn't said that voluntarily in 4 years. The room moved around them. Glasses clinked. Logan's voice rose above the general noise with a laugh that had the particular quality of a man performing comfort. He's a complicated person to trust, Renata said. My brother. A pause. Not because he's dishonest. He's the most honest person I've ever known, which is its own kind of terrifying. But he lives in a world with different rules, and the people who get close to him, the few who have, they find that his world has a way of becoming their world. Evelyn looked at her steadily. Are you warning me? Renata looked back with equal steadiness. I'm telling you what I'd want someone to tell me. She picked up her glass again. Whatever arrangement this is, go in with your eyes open. They are. Renata nodded once. The nod of someone who has done what they could and now considers the matter closed. She stood, straightening her dress. You have good taste, she said with a glance at Evelyn's dress. The modified dark green, the shoulder detail. Did you make that yourself? Modified it. You should come to the atelier opening next month. There's a new fashion collective taking a building in the West District. Some very good young designers. Damien has an interest in it. She walked away before Evelyn could respond. Logan intercepted Evelyn near the door when she was leaving. He did it physically, positioned himself in the hallway, one shoulder against the wall, the posture of someone who has decided something and is making the space confirm it. Vanessa was not with him. Vanessa was back in the sitting room, which meant Logan had watched for the moment he could do this alone. What is this really? He said. I'm going home, Evelyn said. Don't. He said it quietly. Don't do the thing where you make me feel stupid for asking. She stopped, looked at him. He looked worse than he had at Clairlock. Not physically. He never looked bad physically, but in the way a person looks when the relief they expected hasn't materialized and they can't identify why. What do you want, Logan? I want to know why you're at my family's dinner. Because I was invited. By who? She said nothing. His jaw moved. My uncle, he said. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. He pushed off the wall and came closer, not threatening. Logan wasn't physically threatening. It was one of his better qualities, but tight. The body language of someone trying to compress an enormous anxiety into a small enough shape to argue with. Evelyn, whatever you think you're doing, I'm not doing anything, she said. I'm rebuilding my professional network after dedicating 3 years to rebuilding yours. That's what I'm doing with Damien, with the Morrow Group. Those are not different things. He looked at her with something she couldn't quite name. Not guilt, not exactly, but its rougher neighbor. He's not what he seems. None of you are. She said it without heat, flat and accurate. She watched it land. His face shifted. The controlled neutrality cracked just slightly, enough to show the thing underneath, which was younger and more frightened than anything he'd showed her in 3 years. You're angry, he said. You have the right to be angry. I handled everything badly, and I'm not angry, Logan. She picked up her coat from the chair by the door. Anger would mean I'm still in the middle of this. I'm not in the middle of this. She met his eyes. I'm already somewhere else. She left him in the hallway. In the car back to the apartment, her phone lit up with a text from a number she didn't recognize. She looked at it. 3 words. Good work tonight. She understood it was Damien, and that he'd been in the house somewhere in the second half of the evening without her seeing him, which should have unsettled her more than it did. She texted back, they're suspicious. The response came in 40 seconds. Good. Let them be wrong about what they're suspicious of. She looked at the message for a long time. Then she put the phone down and watched the city move past the window. The next 3 weeks were a sequence of carefully calibrated movements. Damien's people arranged professional introductions, a meeting with the creative director of a luxury goods group, an invitation to consult on a textile sourcing project, a quiet but documented profile in an industry newsletter that named her as a designer to watch without over-explaining why she'd been absent. She took every meeting. She brought the notebook. She came prepared in a way she'd never been able to come prepared before. Because before, there had always been something else taking the first portion of her attention. Some logistical crisis in Logan's orbit that required her care before she could attend to her own. Now there was nothing else. There was only the work. She found to her own slight surprise that she was very good at it. Better than she'd given herself credit for, better than 3 years of subordinating the work to other priorities had let her see. Ideas came faster. Her instincts, when she followed them, were accurate. She began to understand in the accelerated way you understand things when obstacles are removed, that the talent had always been there, and the problem had always been the space she'd been given to use it. Damien called every 2 or 3 days. The calls were brief and functional, and she found over time that she'd started looking forward to them in the specific controlled way. You look forward to things that interest you, without wanting them to become necessary. He told her on a Wednesday call in the third week that he was assigning her to oversee the bridal boutique. What bridal boutique? She said, the one I'm acquiring. A pause. Maison Ballard on Court Street. It's been operating under bad management for 2 years. The design vision is there, but the execution is poor. Another pause. The owner is selling. I'm buying. I want you to take the creative directorship. She sat back in her chair. I've never directed a boutique. You've designed for one, consulted for 3, and spent 18 months working for Logan while he ran a fashion line using your concepts without credit. His voice was its usual level. You're qualified. She said nothing for a moment. Why bridal? She said a brief pause that was marginally different from his usual pauses. The collection you sketched, he said. I had my people look at it. You sent photographs of the notebook pages to Claudette 2 weeks before the Clairlock incident. She mentioned it when I ran a background check on your immediate contacts. She felt a quick current of something uncomfortable. You ran a background check on Claudette. I run background checks on everyone. I know what it is, he said. I'm telling you because you asked me to be honest about what I do. A pause. The collection is exceptional. It should exist. She looked at the notebook. The 14 pieces from when she was 24, added to and revised in the weeks since, grown now to 21. You're giving me the boutique, she said. I'm assigning you to run it. When the revenue clears the acquisition cost, I'll transfer ownership to you. She sat with that. What does Logan know about any of this? She asked. Nothing yet. He knows I have business interests in the fashion sector. He doesn't know the specifics. A pause. Vanessa has been asking around. She's spoken to 2 people at the Morrow Group's fashion division, trying to determine what your involvement is. What have they told her? What they're allowed to tell her? That you're a consultant. A pause. She's not satisfied with that answer. No, Evelyn said she wouldn't be. She looked at the window. She stole 3 designs from me 2 years ago for a trade show submission she won an award for. The silence on Damien's end had a different quality. Tell me, he said. She told him. It was not a long story. 3 designs lifted from a moodboard file on a shared drive she'd foolishly given Vanessa access to during a collaborative project that had never gone anywhere. She'd recognized the work immediately at the trade show. She'd said nothing. She told herself it wasn't worth the cost of the confrontation, which was how she'd told herself many things over many years. I have records, she said. Dated files, the original sketches. I kept everything. Keep keeping it, Damien said. All of it. He ended the call. She stared at the phone. She was still staring at it when it buzzed with a text from Vanessa. She looked at it for a long moment before opening it. Hey, I know things are complicated between us, but I saw an industry piece with your name on it, and I wanted you to know I think it's amazing you're getting back out there. You deserve all the good things. I mean that. Evelyn read the message twice. She could see under every word of it the architecture of what it actually was. Reconnaissance dressed as kindness, the monitoring instinct of someone who felt a threat they couldn't locate and was reaching out to gather information under cover of warmth. She typed back, "Thank you. Things are going well. Nothing else." Vanessa responded in under a minute. "We should get coffee. I miss you." Evelyn put the phone face down and did not respond. 4 days later, she was at Maison Ballard, for the first time walking the space with the boutique's outgoing manager and making notes on what needed to change. When she heard Vanessa's voice in the anteroom, she stopped walking. She didn't move, didn't react, she just listened. And what she heard was Vanessa's voice and then another voice, a man's. One of the boutique's senior sales consultants, and the particular rhythm of a conversation where one party is asking for something and the other is deciding how much to give. "I just want to know who's financing the transition," Vanessa was saying. "It's not a complicated question. I'm not in a position to. I'm not asking for confidential figures. I'm just asking whether this is a Morrow acquisition. Yes or no." Evelyn walked to the doorway of the anteroom. Vanessa saw her. The moment lasted about 2 seconds. In those 2 seconds, every piece of composure Vanessa had spent 3 weeks assembling cracked visibly just once before she pulled it back. "Evelyn," she said. "Vanessa." Evelyn looked at the sales consultant. "Could you give us a minute?" He left with the speed of someone grateful for permission. Evelyn closed the door, not slowly and not fast. She stood with her back against and looked at Vanessa standing in the middle of the boutique's anteroom, surrounded by covered gown displays and samples of veiling fabric, and the particular hush of a space designed for one specific kind of occasion. "How did you know I'd be here?" Evelyn asked. Vanessa's chin came up. "I didn't. You were asking about the financing. I have a professional interest in who's operating in this sector because of Logan's line, because it's my industry, too." Vanessa's voice had steadied. She was good at steadying, always had been. "Evelyn, I'm not your enemy." "I know," Evelyn said. "You're something worse. You're my friend who decided I was expendable." The words landed, and Vanessa said nothing for a moment. "What are you doing with Damien Marrow?" Vanessa asked. And here it was, the actual question, finally out in the room, no longer dressed up. The voice had dropped the warmth entirely. Evelyn looked at her. She thought about the 3 stolen designs, the 8 months. The moment in the doorway at Clairlock, with the velvet box in her hand. She thought about Damien's voice on the phone. "I don't carry debts." And the way he'd stood on the gravel shoulder with his hand on the roof of her car, offering her something she was only beginning to understand the full dimensions of. She thought about what Renata had said. "Go in with your eyes open." "I'm working," Evelyn said. "That's all." Vanessa studied her for a long, careful moment. "Be careful," she said finally. The warmth was all the way gone now. What was left was something simpler and more honest. Men like Damien Marrow don't do favors. Whatever he's offering, it costs more than he's told you. Evelyn held the door open. "Thank you for stopping by," she said. Vanessa left. Evelyn stood in the empty anteroom and listened to the boutique settle back into its particular silence, and understood with a certainty that had been building for 3 weeks that the easy phase of whatever this was had just ended. Vanessa was not going to stop asking questions. Logan was not going to stay incurious about Damien's involvement. The Marrow family dinner had planted something in both of them. Not knowledge, but the particular itch of suspicion that once it starts only grows more specific over time. She picked up her notebook. She turned to a blank page. She began to draw fast and without hesitation, the way she drew when something was becoming clear. What she drew was the showroom layout she wanted for Maison Bellard. But in the back of her mind, underneath the design work, something was already calculating. Vanessa had stolen from her once and suffered no consequence. Logan had used her for 3 years and walked away. Both of them had looked at Evelyn Cross and seen something they could take from without cost. And they had been right. And they had kept being right for longer than she could afford to let them be. That calculus was about to change. She just didn't know yet that Vanessa had already decided the same thing about her. And that while Evelyn was drawing boutique layouts and calculating the careful architecture of a professional comeback, Vanessa Reed was already making calls. Evelyn found out what kind of calls on a Tuesday, 3 days after the boutique confrontation, when she arrived at Maison Bellard at 8 in the morning, and found the senior sales consultant, the same man who'd been talking to Vanessa, standing in the middle of the showroom floor with his coat on and a resignation letter in his hand, and the look of someone who had spent the night deciding something and was committed to it. "I'm sorry," he said. He held out the letter. "Effective today." She took it. "Why?" He looked at the floor. "Personal reasons." "Look at me," she said. He did. His eyes were not guilty. They were scared, which was different, and told her something the letter didn't. "Someone spoke to you," she said. "I have a family," he said. "That's all I can tell you." He left. She stood in the empty showroom with his resignation letter and understood that Vanessa had not wasted any time. She didn't know yet what had been said, what pressure had been applied, what specific lever Vanessa had found and used. What she knew was the result. Her best sales resource, the man who knew every client relationship in the boutique, was gone before the boutique had officially reopened under her direction. And his reason was fear rather than opportunity, which meant this was not a competitive move. It was a message. She called Damien. "I know," he said when he answered. No greeting. He already knew. "Who told you?" "I have people watching the boutique, not intrusively. Perimeter after you told me about Vanessa coming in." A pause. He received a call last night at 10:43 from a number registered to a shell company Vanessa set up 2 years ago. Evelyn sat down on the edge of the fitting room platform. The dress forms around her stood in their row, headless, draped in sample fabric. She has a shell company. Several, it appears, were still mapping them. A pause. She threatened his license. He holds a commercial styling certification. It's tied to a professional body she has connections inside. She told him the certification would be reviewed for compliance irregularities if he continued in the role. The showroom was very quiet. Light came through the front windows at a low angle, laying stripes across the floor. She can do that, Evelyn asked. Whether she can is separate from whether he believed she could. A pause. He believed her. Evelyn looked at the resignation letter in her hand. Personal reasons. The most honest 2 words in it. What do I do? She asked. Nothing yet. His voice was level and had the quality of someone who had navigated versions of this before and found the navigation unremarkable. Let her think it worked. Don't replace him immediately. Let the boutique look more disrupted than it is. While she does what? While I find out what else she's planning. A brief pause. She didn't do this to be disruptive. She did it to buy herself time. Time for what? He didn't answer immediately. When he did, the answer was shorter than she expected. I'm working on that. The call ended. She sat in the showroom alone for 20 minutes, which was not a luxury she could usually afford. She used the time to go still in the way she'd learned to go still when she was a child. Not peace, not calm exactly, but a deliberate suspension of reaction. A pulling inward of everything that could be used against her if it showed on her face. She developed it in group home meetings where caseworkers assessed her adjustment. In school offices where teachers decided what kind of problem she was. In the early days with Logan's family, when she'd been the girlfriend, with no last name that meant anything in those rooms. She went still now and thought about Vanessa, not with anger. Anger was available, but she set it aside because anger was imprecise and she needed precision. She thought about Vanessa the way you think about a problem you've been underestimating. With the specific focus of someone revising their assessment upward, Vanessa Reed was not acting like a woman who felt guilty. She was not acting like a woman in the early stage of a relationship trying to consolidate ground against a mutual ex. She was acting like a woman who was afraid. And the specific thing she was afraid of was not Evelyn's emotional state or Logan's divided attention. She was afraid of Damien, which meant she knew something. Evelyn folded the resignation letter and put it in her bag and stood up and went to work. The following week was a controlled performance of normalcy. She sourced a replacement consultant. 2, actually, younger and less established but talented people who owed nothing to anyone in the industry yet, and therefore had no existing pressure points. She advanced the boutique's relaunch timeline by 3 weeks, which required 80-hour days, and the kind of focused output she'd been storing up for 3 years without a proper channel. She designed 6 new pieces for the opening collection, worked directly with the atelier on pattern construction, and rebuilt the client relationship list from the purchase records herself. She did not tell Damien about the 80-hour days. She suspected he knew anyway. The runway show was Damien's addition to the plan. He told her about it on a Thursday call, brief, matter of fact, in the register of someone presenting a business decision already made. The Morrow Group's international fashion division was hosting a showcase event in 6 weeks, a consolidated runway show featuring their portfolio of luxury labels. He wanted Zazon Ballard represented. He wanted Evelyn to design the centerpiece collection, a 12-piece bridal sequence that would close the show. 6 weeks, she said. You have 9 pieces already. She did. He'd had someone photograph her notebook again, or he'd simply counted from what she'd sent to the atelier. She was no longer surprised by these things. She had made a choice about what it meant to be in Damien's orbit, and she had made it with open eyes, and she did not relitigate it. Who else is in the show? She asked. He listed the labels. All of them were established, not historic houses, but known, credible with audiences and press coverage. And then he said a name she recognized from a different context entirely. Vanessa's new label, he said. Redesign. She launched it 4 months ago. The silence was exactly 3 seconds. She's in your fashion division show, Evelyn said. She applied through the standard submission process. My team accepted the application before the current situation was fully clear to them. A pause. I could have her removed, but that would show a hand I'd rather not show yet. No, Evelyn said. Don't remove her. Evelyn, she doesn't know I'm closing the show, she said. Does she? A brief pause. No, the running order is internal. Keep it that way. She looked at the notebook on her drafting table. The 9 pieces, 3 more to design. Let her think she has a position in this show. Let her prepare for it. Let her put everything she has into it. And then we close. The line was quiet. All right, Damien said. She worked. The 3 remaining pieces came fast. Faster than anything she'd designed in years. Faster than felt responsible. But the instinct was clean, and she'd learned enough about her own process to trust it when it came that way. The final piece was the dress from 4 in the morning, the one she'd drawn the night after Clairlock. The dress a woman wears when she has decided something irrevocable. She brought it forward from sketch to fabric mock-up in 8 days. On the 9th day, 2 weeks before the show, she arrived at the atelier at 7 in the morning and found the head seamstress Marta waiting for her in the entrance with her coat still on and her hands clasped in front of her, and an expression that put Evelyn's body on alert before a single word was spoken. What happened? Evelyn said. The toils, Marta said. 3 of them. Someone came in last night. Evelyn walked past her into the workroom. The toils, the fabric mock-ups, the working prototypes from which the final garments were constructed were hung in order along the rear wall. Or they had been. 3 of them were still there. The other 9 had been cut, not slashed, not thrown down, not destroyed in a way that looked like rage. Cut carefully, methodically at the critical structural seams, the places where the construction technique was innovative, where the cut was not standard, where looking at the seam would tell you exactly how the piece worked. The toils hadn't been destroyed, they'd been studied and then disabled. Evelyn stood in front of the ruin samples and felt the specific nausea of someone who has just understood something she should have understood earlier. Her hands were loose at her sides. She could feel her own pulse in her palms. The lock, she asked, intact. No signs of forced entry. Marta's voice was careful. The alarm log shows it was disarmed with the correct code at 2:17 in the morning. Who has the code? Marta looked at the floor. Marta. 4 people, Marta said. You, me, my assistant, Priya. A pause. And the consultant, who resigned. He was given the code during the handover period. The same consultant who had received a call from Vanessa's shell company at 10:43 at night. Evelyn turned and walked to the work table and put both hands flat on the surface and breathed. 1 breath in, 1 out. She did not allow anything else, not yet. Call Priya, she said. Tell her not to come in today. Tell her there's a building inspection. What should I... Don't call the police yet. She straightened. Don't call anyone. I need an hour. She called Damien from the alley behind the atelier, standing in the cold with her coat not fully on, one arm still working into the sleeve. He answered on the first ring. She told him. He listened without interrupting, which was his habit, and when she finished, there was a silence of approximately 4 seconds that felt unlike his other silences. It had a different pressure. The designs, he said, the original sketches. Where are they? My apartment, the notebooks. I don't bring them to the atelier. They're intact. Yes. A pause. But the toils are how the construction works. The cuts, the seam engineering. If she photographed those before she destroyed them, she has the technique, he said. Yes. Another silence. When you say she has the technique, Damien said slowly, what does she actually have? Evelyn leaned against the cold brick of the alley wall. She thought about the toils, about the 9 pieces selected, the specific seams cut, the shoulder construction on pieces 2, 4, and 7, the back closure system on the finale piece, the layered hem technique on the 4 shorter silhouettes. She paused. The things that made the collection new, not the aesthetic. She can see the aesthetic from the sketches. Anyway, the engineering, the things that would take someone else a year to develop independently. Another pause. She has enough to copy it. Not well, not exactly, but close enough that if her collection shows first, it shows before yours, he said. Then mine looks derivative. The words were flat and accurate and landed in the cold air of the alley and stayed there. She heard him breathe once. Give me 12 hours, he said. Damien, 12 hours. Don't go back inside. Go to the apartment. I'll call you. She didn't go to the apartment. She went to the boutique and sat at the work table in the back office with the notebooks open in front of her, and worked because working was the only thing she knew to do with the specific kind of fear she was feeling. Not the freezing kind of fear, the clarifying kind, the kind that strips away everything peripheral and leaves only the essential. She thought about what she had. She had the original dated sketches, time-stamped file metadata on the digital versions, physical notebooks with purchase receipts for the specific papers dated years back. She had atelier records showing construction timelines. She now realized, the security footage from the atelier. The alarm log would correlate with whatever the exterior camera had recorded, and the exterior camera covered the alley entrance. She called Marta. The security camera on the rear entrance. She said, "Don't let anyone access the footage. Don't let anyone in to review it. Say the system is under maintenance if anyone asks." "All right." And Marta, a pause. "Did Priya seem different to you recently before today?" A long silence. "She had a new coat last week." Marta said, "I noticed because it was very expensive and I thought it was odd, but I didn't." "It's all right," Evelyn said. "Thank you." She put the phone down. Priya, not the resigned consultant operating remotely. Priya, who was in the atelier every day, who knew the workroom layout, who had watched every piece develop from sketch to structure. Priya, who had a new expensive coat. Evelyn sat with this for a moment and felt something shift inside her. A gear moving to a position it hadn't been in before. Not anger, something colder. Something that had been forming in stages over weeks and was now finally fully formed. She had been thinking about this situation, about Vanessa, about the sabotage, about the theft, as something she was responding to, something happening to her that she was managing. She had been, even in the months since Clairlock, still operating from a defensive position, still primarily trying to protect what she was building, still giving the other side the advantage of making the first move. That was going to stop. Damien called at 7 that evening. "The footage is recoverable," he said. Priya entered the atelier at 2:11. She was inside for 43 minutes. She photographed the toils with a phone. "We can see the flash intervals from the camera angle." Then she cut them. A pause. "She met with someone the following evening. We tracked the phone." "Vanessa," Evelyn said. "A restaurant in the West District. Cash payment. 2 hours." Evelyn was standing at the window of the boutique's back office. The street outside was ordinary and indifferent. A delivery truck. 2 people walking a dog. "I need you to do something for me," she said. "Tell me. Don't act on this yet." Her voice was steady. "Not the footage. Not Priya. Not Vanessa. Don't move on any of it." A pause. "Explain. If you move now, she knows you have the footage. She adjusts. She finds another angle." Evelyn turned from the window. "But if she thinks this worked, if she thinks she's destroyed my collection and bought herself the show, she'll keep going. She'll use what she took. She'll put it in her collection, and she'll bring it to the runway. And then it's evidence. It's proof." A pause. "Public proof in front of the industry, in front of your family." She paused again. "In front of Logan." The silence on Damien's end was different from all the others. It had a quality she was only now learning to read. Not assessment, not calculation. Something that was in its own contained way close to approval. "What do you need to rebuild in 2 weeks?" he asked. "The atelier working double shifts. New fabric orders tonight. I'll send the specifications within the hour. I need Marta to bring in 2 additional pattern cutters, experienced ones, people she trusts." A pause. "And I need the finale piece built first. I need it perfect before anything else." "Done." And Damien, she picked up the pen from the desk. "I need you at the show, not in the back. Not watching from somewhere I can't see you. I need you in the front row." A pause. "Because he asked, because when it's over," she said, "what happens next is going to happen fast, and I want you close enough to respond." He said nothing for 3 seconds. "I'll be there," he said. He ended the call. She wrote the fabric specifications from memory quickly, without hesitation, because she had built these pieces in her head so many times that the measurements lived somewhere underneath language in the part of her that drew at 4 in the morning and never needed to be told twice. She sent the list to Damien's contact. Then she opened the notebook to the finale piece and looked at the dress again. The clean shoulders, the confident neckline, the lines of something that had decided and began to revise it. Not because it wasn't right, because she wanted it to be more than right. She wanted it to be irrefutable. She worked until 2 in the morning and went home and slept 4 hours and came back the next day and started out again. And the days that followed had the quality of controlled burning, everything focused to a single point, everything non-essential cleared away, the work happening at a temperature and an intensity she'd never quite reached before because she'd never quite had this much at stake. Marta's additional pattern cutters arrived. The fabric orders came in. The atelier ran 2 shifts. Evelyn moved through it all like someone who had simplified herself down to the necessary. Here directing, here adjusting a seam, here making the decision about the back closure that would replace what Vanessa had photographed with something better. Something the photograph wouldn't capture. Something that could only be understood by looking at the finished garment. And in the fashion district in a studio Evelyn had never seen, Vanessa Reed was working from the photographs on Priya's phone, building copies of techniques that were already being replaced, preparing a collection for a show she thought she understood. She didn't know about the front row. She didn't know what was coming. She didn't know that 6 days before the show, Evelyn Cross sat in a chair in Damien Morrow's office for the first time, a room she'd never entered in a building she'd passed a dozen times without knowing what was in it, and watched him sign 3 separate documents that she had not asked him to prepare. Documents that transferred something she hadn't asked to be transferred, and understood for the first time the full dimensions of the thing she'd walked into on that gravel shoulder in November. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "No," he agreed. She looked at the documents. "Why?" He set down the pen and looked at her across the desk, with the directness that she had stopped finding startling, and had started finding in the private accounting of her own responses the most reliable thing about him. "Because you rebuilt everything in 2 weeks," he said. "And you did it better than the first version." A pause. People who do that deserve to own what they build. She held his gaze. Something moved between them. Not dramatic, not announced, not the kind of thing that would make noise. The quieter kind. The kind that registers as a change in weight distribution, a shift in how much space a person's presence takes up in a room. She looked away first, picked up the documents. "I'll keep these. I know." She stood to leave. She was at the door when he spoke again. "Evelyn." She turned. He was still at the desk, hands flat on the surface. The posture of a man who had said most of what he intended to say, and was choosing the last part carefully. "At the show," he said, "whatever happens, I need you to trust that I see everything that's in that room." She looked at him for a moment. "I know you do," she said. She left. In the elevator down, she stood with the documents against her chest and thought about what Renata had told her. His world has a way of becoming your world. She thought about the gravel shoulder, the card in her palm, the 4 in the morning phone call. She thought about the 14 pieces in the old notebook that had become 21 and were now 12. Distilled, refined, the essential thing rather than everything. The elevator opened. She walked out into the lobby and through the glass doors and into the cold air of the street. 6 days. She had 6 days to finish, and Vanessa Reed had 6 days to finalize a collection built on stolen technique that was already obsolete. And Logan Ashford had 6 days of believing that everything was exactly as he'd calculated it. And the Morrow family had 6 days of not knowing what was about to walk into the room in a dress designed at 4 in the morning by a woman who had stopped being the person people did things to. She walked to the atelier. She had work to do. And in the lighting grid above the venue's main stage, in the rigging that would hold the runway show's ceiling fixtures, a technician Vanessa Reed had contacted 3 days earlier was already finished the job. Evelyn found out about the lighting rig on the morning of the show. Not from Damien, from Marta, who had arrived at the venue at 5 in the morning to begin dressing the models, and had noticed in the particular way that people who pay attention to physical spaces noticed things that one of the stage technicians on the lighting crew was working on a section of the overhead rigging that had already been signed off as complete 2 days prior. She thought it odd. She'd taken a photograph on her phone of the man in the section of rigging he was working on. The way observant people sometimes do when something registers as wrong, without yet being articulable as wrong, and she'd texted it to Evelyn at 5:22 in the morning. Evelyn saw the text at 6:41 when she woke up. She looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she forwarded it to Damien without comment. His response came in 90 seconds. Don't change anything. Come in on schedule. Tell no one. She dressed. The finale piece, the dress from 4 in the morning, built now in heavy silk crepe with the revised back closure and the shoulder construction that could not be photographed and understood, only touched and seen in 3 dimensions, was already at the venue in a garment bag in the model's dressing area. She had nothing to carry. She took a car to the venue and arrived at 8 and walked through the loading entrance the way she'd been walking. Through the loading entrance every day for a week. The venue was a converted exhibition hall in the city's arts district. High ceilings, concrete floors, the bones of something industrial dressed in temporary luxury. The runway ran down the center of the hall's main space, flanked by seating on both sides. The ceiling grid above it was dense with lighting fixtures, the kind of configuration that required professional rigging and could, if sections of it were improperly secured, come down under the weight of its own hardware. She did not look up when she came in. She went directly to the dressing area and spoke to Marta and began the work of the morning, which was the work of making 12 garments and the women inside them into something that would carry the weight of what she needed this hour to carry. The models were professionals. They took direction without drama and held stillness when stillness was required and moved when she asked them to move. She worked down the line, fitting, adjusting, checking seams, making the 2 small alterations she'd known she'd need to make in the morning light of an unfamiliar space. The work was grounding. Her hands knew what to do. Her hands had always known. At 9:30, she stepped outside the dressing area and found one of Damien's men, a quiet man named Rice she'd met twice before, who communicated mostly by adjacency, standing in the corridor outside. "He wants you to know," Rice said low without preamble. "The technician in the photograph is not on the venue's contracted crew list." She looked at him. He was brought in by a third party 2 days ago. Rice said the section he was working on this morning is the primary load-bearing junction for the center rig, the one directly above the finale position. The finale position where the last model would stand, where the designer traditionally walked at the end, where Evelyn would be standing in approximately 9 hours. She breathed in, out. Her hands were loose at her sides. "Where is Damien?" she asked. "In the building," Rice said. "He asks that you proceed as normal." And the rig being addressed. A pause. Quietly, she went back inside. The morning moved. She dressed her models and checked her running order and spoke to the show's director about the music timing in a conversation that was entirely professional and cost her something she didn't have a name for, maintaining that register while the information from the corridor sat in her chest like a stone. Vanessa arrived at 10. Evelyn heard her before she saw her. The particular frequency of Vanessa's social voice, the performance of ease that had always been her primary instrument. She was in the adjacent dressing section with her 6-piece collection and 2 models and an assistant who looked overwhelmed. Evelyn stood in the doorway between the 2 sections for a moment and watched. Vanessa's collection was hanging on the rack, 6 pieces, and Evelyn looked at them, couldn't help it. Looked with the eye of someone who knew exactly what she was looking at and felt the specific cold of being confirmed. The shoulder construction on the 3rd piece, the back closure detail on the 5th, the hemline treatment on the 2nd and 4th, which was unidentical to hers, but was clearly derived from it. Translated by someone who had seen how it worked, but not fully understood why, producing something that was close enough to accuse and different enough to deny. Vanessa turned and saw her. The 2 seconds that followed were the most honest 2 seconds Evelyn had experienced with Vanessa in 14 years. No performance, just the raw assessment of 2 people who now fully understood each other. "Good luck today," Evelyn said. Vanessa said nothing for a moment. "Then, you too." Evelyn went back to her models. Logan arrived at 11 for the pre-show walkthrough that label representatives were invited to attend. She saw him from across the hall. He'd come with a business contact she didn't recognize. was dressed with the particular precision of someone who considers their appearance a professional credential. He saw her and held her gaze for 3 seconds before looking away, which told her everything about his current state that she needed to know. He didn't approach her. She didn't approach him. The hall filled over the following hours. By 5 in the afternoon, the seating was being arranged. The catering was in place in the atrium. And the lighting crew, the legitimate contracted crew, was running final checks on the rig from the floor with hand lights and printed diagrams. She watched them from the side of the stage and thought about the center junction and what Rice had told her and what being addressed quietly meant in Damien Merrow's vocabulary. She decided to trust it. She had made that decision on a gravel shoulder in November, and she had not revisited it. And she was not going to revisit it now, 8 hours before the finale in a corridor that smelled of fresh paint and industrial cleaner and the particular anticipatory tension of a space about to become something. The guest list was the thing that changed the pressure of the evening. She had known the Morrow family would be present. It was their event, their investment, their showcase. She had not known, until she saw the seating chart at 4 in the afternoon, that Damien had placed his mother and 2 of his senior family associates in the second row, directly behind the front row, which he'd reserved entirely. She had not known that the family's primary legal counsel was on the list, or that 3 journalists from major industry publications were confirmed, or that the guests list had expanded from 90 to 140. In the 48 hours since she'd last seen it, she stood with the seating chart and felt the scale of what tonight actually was rearranging itself around her, larger and more public than she'd understood. She called Damien. "The guest list," she said. "Yes, you expanded it. I made some calls." A pause. The industry journalists were my addition. The family members were my mother's. She insisted on attending when I told her. He stopped. "When you told her what?" A pause. "When I told her about you," he said. She stood very still in the corner of the staging area, with the phone at her ear, and the seating chart in her hand, and the noise of the venue preparation moving around her. "What did you tell her?" she asked. "The truth," he said, "which I will explain more completely after tonight, Damien." "Front row left side," he said. "I'll be there before the show starts." He ended the call. She stood there for another 10 seconds. Then she put the phone in her pocket and went back to work, because work was what she had, and it was enough, and it had always been enough. At 6:45 she changed, not into the finale piece that was for the model who would close the show. She wore a version of the dark green dress, the one she'd modified for the family dinner. But this time she'd rebuilt it entirely from a fresh cut made 2 days ago, structured through the torso, a neckline that said something without saying it. She looked at herself in the mirror in the dressing area and was precise about what she saw. A woman who was 30 years old and had spent the last decade being useful to other people's ambitions, and had in the last 4 months begun to understand what her own ambitions felt like when she stopped managing them down to a size other people found comfortable. She looked like that. She went out to the stage. The show began at 7:30. The first 8 pieces moved through the runway in the correct order, at the correct intervals, with the music Evelyn had selected sitting under them. The way good music sits under good clothes, not explaining, not decorating, just holding the same frequency. She watched from the side, standing beside Marta, and her body was coiled and precise in the way it got when something was happening that mattered. The crowd was responsive, not loudly. This wasn't that kind of audience. But she could read a room, and she read this one. And what was in it was attention, real attention. The kind that a room gives when it's seen something new and knows it before it has the words. Vanessa's collection ran in the 5th slot. 6 pieces, and Evelyn watched them from the side of the stage and felt something she hadn't expected to feel, which was almost sorry. Vanessa Reed was not without talent. The aesthetic was confident. The styling was good. But the construction technique she'd stolen and tried to translate without fully understanding. It showed in exactly the way Evelyn had predicted, close enough to be a copy, different enough to be a worse version. It didn't land the way hers would. The room was polite. It was not attention. Vanessa came off stage and passed within 6 feet of Evelyn in the wings without looking at her, and Evelyn let her pass without a word. The 9th piece went out, the 10th. Then Rice appeared at her left shoulder and said very quietly, "Something is wrong with the center rig." She looked at him. "Not the same junction," he said. "A secondary one. The technician apparently accessed 2 points this morning, not one. Our people caught the primary. The secondary. How bad?" she said. "The center fixture cluster," he said. "If it goes, it will go toward the finale mark." Her heart was in her throat. She breathed through it. When? Unknown. The weight load from the heat of the fixtures is cumulative. Could be the next 20 minutes. Could be longer. He paused. "Damien wants you to delay the finale. If I delay the finale, the room falls apart, and the ending is. He knows. He's asking anyway." She looked at the stage. The 11th piece was halfway down the runway. 1 piece left before the finale. The finale model was in the wings on the opposite side, dressed, ready. The finished garment on her body, the dress from 4 in the morning, standing under the stage lights it had been built for. She looked up at the rigging above the finale mark. From here, in the lower light of the wings, she couldn't see what Rice was describing. She looked at the center cluster of fixtures, large, heavy, mounted on a junction she couldn't assess from this angle. She thought about the show, the 12 pieces, the rebuilt collection, the 2 weeks of double shifts and the fabric orders, and Marta's extra pattern cutters, and the atelier at 2 in the morning. She thought about the industry journalists in the front row, and Damien's family in the second row. And Logan somewhere in that audience, who did not know what was about to walk out of these wings and down that runway. She thought about the alternative, which was pulling the finale and explaining to 140 people why the most important piece in the most important show of her career had been stopped by an act of sabotage she couldn't yet prove in this room in this moment, and handing Vanessa exactly the ambiguity she needed. "Tell Damien I'm sending the finale out," she said. Rice looked at her for 1 second. "I'll tell him," he said, and moved. She crossed the wings to the finale model, a woman named Senna, who was tall and calm, and had been doing this for 8 years, and communicated primarily through the exact angle of her chin. 30 seconds, Evelyn told her. Senna nodded. The 11th piece cleared the end of the runway. Applause. The music shifted. A lower register, slower, the transition she'd designed for this exact moment. Senna walked out. Evelyn watched from the wing. The dress moved the way she'd known it would move, the way things move when they're built correctly. When every seam is where it belongs and the fabric is the right weight, and the structure underneath it is doing what structure is supposed to do, which is hold something upright without being visible. It moved like a decision, like something that knew exactly where it was going. The room changed. She felt it before she saw it. The particular shift in a crowd's collective body when it stops processing and starts experiencing. The attention that had been present through the whole show, concentrated, narrowed, focused on the figure moving down the center of the runway in a dress that had been drawn at 4 in the morning by a woman who had just lost everything and was in the process of understanding that she had lost nothing that mattered. She was watching Senna at the runway's end mark. She was watching the front row. Damien left side as promised, watching the runway with the same stillness he brought to everything. And beside him, an empty seat she hadn't noticed before. She was watching the room. She was watching Logan, who she could see from this angle in the 4th row, whose face had done something she'd never seen it do, which was go very still and very young at the same time. She was watching all of this when the sound came from above. Not a crack, not dramatic, a metallic complaint, the sound of something under load that has reached the limit of what it was asked to hold. A groan in the infrastructure high above the runway. Senna was at the end mark, holding her final position. The sound came again. She saw it happen from the wing, and she saw Damien see it at the same moment. His head came up before anyone else's. The threat assessment reflex of someone whose body had been trained to read rooms in exactly this way, and he was out of his seat before the fixture cluster began to move. He moved fast for a man in a suit in a crowded row of seating. He hit the runway in 3 steps, and he was crossing it at a run when the center cluster gave way. Not all at once, in the slow, terrible sequence of structural failure, the sound preceding the movement by just enough to matter. Senna had already seen him coming, and stepped to the side by trained instinct. The reflex of someone who has spent years learning to read a room for danger, and Damien reached her position at the finale mark and took the impact on his left shoulder and the side of his torso as the cluster came down. The sound it made was not what she expected. Shorter, denser, the sound of weight meeting resistance, then screaming from the audience, which was also not what she expected in volume or pitch, and then people moving. And then Damien was on the runway floor with the fixture cluster on top of him and not moving. And Rice and two other men she recognized were already on the stage, and Senna was 5 feet away, unhurt, looking at Damien on the floor with her hands over her mouth. Evelyn was running. She reached him before the paramedics, before anyone official. She got down on the runway floor beside him and put her hand on his face and said his name, and his eyes were open, which was the only information she needed in that first second. Open and tracking, finding her face. "I'm all right," he said. His voice was compressed, breathing wrong. "You're not, relatively." A pause measured between shallow breaths. "The show, Damien, the show," he said again. "Did it?" "Yes." She put her hand on the side of his face and held it there. It landed. He closed his eyes. Not unconscious, she could feel him breathing against her palm. Just something releasing. Something that had been held through the impact of a lighting rig. Dropping on his left side, and had been waiting for the one piece of information it needed before it could let go. The paramedics came. She stood back and let them work, and stood on the runway of her own show, with the crowd in controlled chaos around her. And the dress she'd built, still moving under the stage lights, because Senna had not taken it off, was still standing at the side of the runway in it. And the dress was doing what it was built to do, which was hold its shape under pressure. She looked out at the audience and found Logan in the 4th row. He was standing as everyone was standing now, but he was not looking at the stage or at the medical team around Damien. He was looking at Evelyn. She held his gaze. She did not look away. And then she looked at Vanessa, who was standing in the wings on the opposite side of the stage. And Vanessa's face was not showing the expression of a woman who had just witnessed a terrible accident. It was showing the expression of a woman whose plan had partially worked, and who was rapidly calculating whether the remaining variables were still in her favor. It was the most honest Evelyn had ever seen her. In the atrium outside the hall, while Damien was being stabilized and the hall was being secured, Rice appeared at Evelyn's side with a tablet and showed her without comment what Damien's team had retrieved in the last 20 minutes. The security footage from the venue's loading entrance at 3:14 in the morning, which showed the unauthorized technician entering with equipment, and beside him in a coat with the collar up, the profile of a face that the camera had caught for 4 clean seconds at the wrong angle for concealment. Evelyn looked at the footage. She looked at Vanessa's face in those 4 seconds, the specific angle of her chin, the way she moved, the particular physical signature that 14 years of friendship had made as familiar to Evelyn as her own reflection. She looked at Rice. "Send it to your secure archive," she said. "Don't distribute it yet. I need one more thing first." Rice looked at her steadily. "What do you need?" She looked back through the atrium doors toward the hall where the paramedics were still working, where the runway was still lit, where the dress was still standing. "I need to know," she said, "whether there's a model in the hospital." Rice's face changed. "What model?" She turned to face him fully. Vanessa was in that atelier the night the toils were cut. She had time she needed to buy. She needed to delay something besides just my collection. She looked at the tablet. The show was supposed to have a different finale. The original closing model was changed 4 days ago due to illness, sudden illness. She paused. Who was the original closing model, and why was she replaced 4 days ago, due to a poisoning she didn't know was a poisoning? Her name was Daria Voss, 26 years old, signed to the same modeling agency that supplied 3 of the show's other models. And she had been admitted to St. Carmine Medical Center 4 days prior with acute gastrointestinal symptoms that her doctors had attributed to a food contamination incident and treated accordingly. She had recovered. She did not know when she was discharged 2 days later that the herbal supplement she'd been given at a promotional event she'd attended the previous week An event Vanessa Reed had organized under the redesigned label's launch marketing had been the source. Evelyn found this out in a hospital corridor at 11:45 at night. Standing outside the room where Damien was being assessed for 3 fractured ribs and a displaced shoulder, reading a message from Rice on her phone with the specific quality of attention you give to information that rearranges every previous piece into a different configuration. She had known Vanessa was calculating. She had not known how far the calculation extended. She had understood sabotage, the toils, the technician, the lighting rig. She had understood theft. She had not understood until this moment that Vanessa Reed had been willing to put a person in a hospital in order to change a running order, and that she had done it calmly in advance, under the cover of a promotional event, with the patience of someone who had been planning this for longer than Evelyn had been planning anything. She sat down in one of the corridor chairs and put the phone face down on her knee and breathed. A nurse passed. The corridor was quiet in the way hospital corridors are quiet at midnight. Not empty, but operating on a different frequency, the frequency of things that cannot wait for morning. She picked the phone back up and called Rice. "The supplement," she said when he answered, "can it be traced?" "We have the event records," Rice said. "The supplement brand, the distribution list. Daria Voss's name is on the attendee log. Her medical records from St. Carmine show the admission date and presenting symptoms." A pause. The supplement contained a compound that in the quantity present would produce exactly those symptoms within 72 to 96 hours of ingestion. "How do you know the quantity present?" "We obtained a sample from the same batch." A pause. Damien's team began reviewing the event 2 days ago, when the running order change was flagged as unusual. She closed her eyes for a moment. Damien had known. He'd known or suspected and had not told her. And she understood why. Not to protect her from information, but because he was the kind of person who did not present a partial picture. He waited until the picture was complete. "The venue footage," she said. "Daria's medical records, the supplement batch, the shell company, the atelier security footage." She opened her eyes. "Everything is documented." "Everything is documented," Rice confirmed. "Send all of it to the attorney Damien uses for the Morrow Group's legal compliance division tonight, with a note that I'll be calling in the morning." A pause. "Not Damien's instruction. Mine," she said. Another pause. "Done," Rice said, and the call ended. She sat in the corridor for another 10 minutes. Then she stood and went into Damien's room. He was in the bed with his left arm immobilized and his ribs taped, and the particular compressed stillness of someone managing significant pain without discussing it. His eyes were open. He'd been looking at the ceiling and turned his head when she came in, and the movement cost him something he didn't let show in his face, except in the slight tightening around his eyes. "Sit down," he said. She sat in the chair beside the bed. They looked at each other for a moment. "You knew about Daria," she said. "I suspected. I didn't have confirmation until tonight. When were you going to tell me?" "When I had the complete picture." He held her gaze. "I was wrong to wait. I'm telling you now that I was wrong." She looked at him. He said it the way he said everything directly, without performance, without the softening rhetoric people use when they're apologizing and want the apology to land gently. Just the fact of it stated. Wrong. He'd been wrong. "Your shoulder," she said, "fractured. It'll repair. Your ribs. 3 non-displaced." A pause. "I've had worse." She believed him and didn't want to think about the circumstances under which it was true. "You didn't have to go onto the runway," she said. He looked at her steadily. "Yes, I did." She held his gaze for a long moment. Something moved between them in the room's quiet that had been building since a gravel shoulder in November, and had been building faster in the weeks since, in phone calls and brief offices, and the particular texture of a person's attention when it is entirely without pretense. "I'm going to handle tomorrow," she said. "You're going to stay here, Evelyn. You have 3 fractured ribs and a displaced shoulder." She said, "You're going to stay here. I have everything I need, and I know what to do with it. This part is mine." He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his face, the carved contained face that had given nothing away in a gravel shoulder parking area at the start of all this, shifted. Not much, just enough. "All right," he said. She stood. She pulled the blanket that had slipped from his arm back up to his shoulder, careful of the immobilized left side. And the gesture was matter of fact, and neither of them commented on it. "Sleep," she said. "I don't sleep well, hospitals. No one does." She picked up her coat from the back of the chair. "I'll be back in the morning." She left. Logan and Vanessa's engagement party was in 3 days. She had known about it for 2 weeks. Renata had mentioned it on a phone call with the specific neutrality of a woman communicating something she thought Evelyn should be aware of, without telling her what to do about it. A celebration at the Ashford family's estate in the North District. 60 guests. The formal announcement of the engagement that had been quietly understood for months. She drove home from the hospital and sat at the drafting table until 4 in the morning. She was not drawing. She was reading the documents Rice had assembled page by page in the order they'd need to be presented if they were going to be useful, rather than merely incriminating. She was not a lawyer. She understood from the structure of the documents what was there. She understood from 3 years of watching Logan operate in family business contexts what it would mean when it arrived in a room full of people who had a financial stake in what it revealed. She made notes. She organized. At 4:15, she wrote an email to Damien's compliance attorney and attached the file index Rice had prepared and added 3 paragraphs of her own written in the plain language of someone who knows what happened and has stopped being interested in how it sounds. She slept 3 hours. She woke at 7 and dressed and went to the hospital and sat with Damien for 2 hours while he was assessed and medicated and assessed again. And she watched him manage the pain of 3 fractured ribs with the same contained quality he brought to everything which she was beginning to understand was not the absence of feeling, but the decision about what to do with it. "The attorney called this morning," he said. "Your email." "Yes, you organized it well." A pause. "Better than my team's initial index." "I've been managing other people's professional materials for 3 years," she said. "I know how to make information legible." He looked at her. "The party is Thursday," she said. "I know. I want to use it. I know that, too." He shifted slightly against the pillow, and the shift cost him, and he absorbed the cost without comment. "The family will be there. Legal counsel. Every person whose opinion of Logan and Vanessa matters in that world will be in that room. And every person whose opinion of us matters," she said. He looked at her. "Us," he said, not a question. She held his gaze. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "You're sure?" he said. "About Thursday. About all of it." She looked at him in the hospital bed, with his arm immobilized and his ribs taped and his face doing the thing it did when it was being entirely honest, which was go very still and very direct. And she thought about the November morning on the gravel shoulder and the card in her hand and the 4 in the morning phone call and every phone call since. And she thought about what Renata had said and what she'd said back. "They are open." And she thought about the runway and the dress and the room changing. And she thought about Damien crossing the runway floor at a run because the alternative was unacceptable to him, and he was not a person who accepted unacceptable things. "Yes," she said. "I'm sure about all of it." He exhaled. One careful breath managed around the ribs. "Then I need to be out of here by Wednesday," he said. "Thursday morning at the earliest," she said. He looked like he was going to argue. He looked at her face and didn't. The party was on a Thursday evening at 7 o'clock. She arrived at the Ashford estate with Damien at 6:55, which was 5 minutes before the formal gathering began, which was intentional. She wore the dress she'd worn on the runway, the rebuilt dark green, not the finale piece, which was back in the atelier's archive, and she looked exactly like herself, which was the point. She had spent 3 years in rooms like this, trying to occupy the minimum necessary space. She was not doing that tonight. Damien moved carefully. The ribs demanded it, but he moved without the assistance of anything that would make the pain visible, which was his decision, and she'd stopped arguing with it. He wore a dark suit, and his left arm was still slightly restricted in movement, and none of this was visible to the room unless you knew to look for it. They walked in together. The room's response was not dramatic. It was more specific than that. A sequential reorganization of attention person by person. The way a room recalibrates when something enters it that doesn't fit the template it was operating on. Renata saw them first, and her expression did a precise and controlled thing that was not surprise. She'd known Evelyn realized or had suspected closely enough that confirmation was simply confirmation. Logan's mother saw them second, and her face went through 3 distinct phases in approximately 2 seconds. Logan was across the room and saw them third. Vanessa was beside him. What happened to Vanessa's face was not in 3 phases. It was immediate in total. A collapse of the entire careful construction she'd been maintaining, and then the reconstruction happening in real time, and then the performance of composure that came after, which was the worst performance Evelyn had ever seen her give, because Vanessa was frightened, and frightened people cannot perform well. Logan crossed the room. He didn't look frightened. He looked furious, which was the emotion he used when he was frightened and didn't want anyone to know. "What is this?" he said, low voice, tight jaw. "Good evening, Logan," Damien said. He said it with the absolute neutrality of a man who has already won something and is being patient about when to say so. "You brought her here," Logan looked at Evelyn, "to our engagement party. We were invited," Evelyn said, "by your mother last month." This was true. Logan's mother had sent the invitation before the runway show, before the hospital in the period when Evelyn's presence at Morrow family functions was still being processed as professional adjacency. The invitation had not been rescinded. Evelyn had waited to see if it would be, and it had not been, which told her something about Logan's mother that she filed away. Logan looked at Damien. "I need to speak to you privately." "No," Damien said. The word was so simple and so flat that it took Logan a full 2 seconds to process it. "Excuse me. Whatever you want to say to me," Damien said, "you can say here. I have no private conversation to offer you tonight." The room had configured itself around them. Not obviously, not in the way of a crowd watching a fight. In the way of a room full of people who have the social intelligence to understand that something significant is happening and are adjusting their positions accordingly. Conversations tapering off, attention redirecting. Renata appeared at Damien's side. She said nothing. She simply stood there, which was its own communication. "Fine," Logan said. His voice had gone to the register. She recognized the performed authority register, the one that came from anxiety. "Fine, you want to do this here." He looked at the room, his family, his business contacts, Vanessa somewhere behind him, and made the calculation that Evelyn had watched him make 100 times, which was the calculation of a man who believes his best asset is his confidence and who leads with it regardless of the terrain. "Go ahead." Damien looked at Evelyn. She reached into the inner pocket of her coat, which she had not removed, and produced a folded document. She unfolded it. She held it so that Logan could see the header, which was the Morrow Group's Legal Compliance Division name, and below it the case reference number, and below that the date, which was 2 days ago. "This is a formal complaint," she said, filed with both the industry standards body and the city's commercial crimes division. It documents the theft of intellectual property, specifically 3 original design pieces taken from a shared digital workspace, in the period when Vanessa Reed and I maintained a collaborative file access arrangement. Dated evidence of the originals, the submission records, and the award documentation are attached. She held his gaze. It also documents the sabotage of the Maison Ballard atelier, the destruction of production toils, and the photographing of proprietary construction techniques by an individual operating under Vanessa Reed's direction and compensated through a shell company registered 2 years ago. A pause. And it documents the deliberate contamination of a food supplement distributed to a model named Daria Voss, who was hospitalized for 4 days with symptoms consistent with the compound present in the supplement batch, which has been laboratory tested and preserved as evidence. The room was very quiet. Logan had stopped performing authority. His face had done something she'd never seen it do, which was go blank. Not controlled blank, not performed blank. Actually blank, the blankness of a man whose calculations have just returned an error he doesn't have a framework for. He turned and looked at Vanessa. Vanessa was standing 8 feet away, and she was looking at Evelyn, and her face was the face of someone who has been running very fast for a long time and has just stopped because there is nowhere left to run to, and stopping and running now costs the same thing. "You poisoned someone," Logan said. Not a question. Logan, you put someone in the hospital. His voice had changed entirely. The authority register was gone. What was left was younger and quieter, and more frightened than Evelyn had ever heard from him. Vanessa, it wasn't. She recovered. She was fine. You put a person in the hospital, he said again, slower. I needed the running order changed. Vanessa's voice was cracking at the edges. She was holding herself together with the last of something that was almost gone. I needed more time, Logan. Everything I did was for us, for the label, for what we were building. Don't. He stepped back from her, one step. It was the most physical thing Evelyn had ever seen Logan do, and it communicated something that none of his 3 years of performed confidence had. Don't put that on me. Vanessa looked at him. And then something happened in her face that Evelyn had not expected and would remember for a long time, which was the disappearance of every layer. The warmth, the calculation, the performance, the fear, and underneath it all, the raw face of someone who has been holding too much together for too long and has reached the exact moment where the holding fails. You knew what you wanted, Vanessa said. You knew what Logan needed. You told me the inheritance was the problem. You told me Evelyn was the obstacle. Her voice was shaking. I just solved the problems you told me about. The room absorbed this. Logan said nothing. Evelyn looked at him across the space between them and watched him understand in real time what the last year of his life had actually been. Not what he'd told himself it was. Not the controlled narrative of a man exercising careful judgment, but the reality of someone who had said things out loud to a person who had been paying closer attention than he understood. I didn't tell you to hurt anyone, he said finally. Quiet, almost inaudible. No, Vanessa said. You just told me what you needed and assumed the details would take care of themselves. The silence after that had the weight of something structural. 2 men in plain clothes had been standing near the entrance since 6:55. They moved now, not dramatically, not with any theater. They moved with the efficiency of people who had been waiting for a particular moment and had recognized it. One of them spoke to Vanessa quietly. She looked at him. She looked at Evelyn. She looked at Logan, who was not looking at her. She went with them without resistance. She walked out of the Ashford Estate engagement party between 2 plain officers with her chin up and her face arranged in the last thing she had, which was a controlled expression on a face that had nothing behind it anymore. And Evelyn watched her go and felt none of the satisfaction she had expected to feel, which she took to mean something she wasn't ready to fully examine. Logan stood in the middle of the room with his family around him in the party's decorations. The flowers, the champagne stations, the engagement announcement cards Evelyn had seen stacked near the entrance when she came in, completing their context with a particular cruelty that required no comment. He turned and looked at Evelyn. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. I was going to apologize, he said. Last week I wrote it out. I know, she said. Renata told me. He absorbed that. I need you to know, he said. And his voice was the most honest she had ever heard it, stripped of every instrument he'd ever used to manage how he was perceived. Just the bare sound of a person saying something true. That what I said at Clairlock, the orphan comment. I've thought about it every day since. She looked at him. I know you have. Does it matter that I have? She considered this carefully. The way she considered things, she wanted to answer accurately. It matters that you're a person who can think about it. She said, it doesn't change what you used it for. He looked at the floor. He nodded once, the nod of someone who has received accurate information. Evelyn. He looked up. His eyes were doing something unfamiliar, something she thought might simply be him without the performance, which she had very rarely seen. The inheritance. Whatever Damien has done with the trust structure, I'm not going to fight it. I want you to know that. She said nothing. I'm not saying that because I have no choice. He said, I have choices. I could contest it. I probably would lose, but I could make it slow and difficult. A pause. I'm saying it because I already took enough from you. She held his gaze for a moment longer. Thank you. Logan, she said. It was not forgiveness. It was not warmth. It was the acknowledgement due to someone who has done the minimum necessary thing after a long time of not doing it. And it was the most she had for him, and she thought it was probably enough. She turned and found Damien beside her. He had been letting her handle this, had been standing at the correct distance, the distance of someone who understands exactly when to be present and when to be background, and she was still finding the edges of what it meant, that this was something he understood instinctively. She looked at him. "Ready," she said. "Yes," he said. Renata was waiting near the entrance. She looked at Evelyn with the assessing open gaze she'd brought to their first conversation and said simply, "My mother wants to meet you properly, not at a dinner where neither of you knows what's happening." Evelyn looked at her. "Sunday," Renata said, "our mother's house lunch." A pause. "She watched the runway show footage this morning. She has opinions." Evelyn almost smiled. "I'll be there." The city at 11 on a Thursday night was ordinary and continuous, indifferent to what had happened in a North District estate over the last 2 hours. The car moved through it, and Evelyn sat in the back beside Damien, and he did not speak, and she did not speak, and the silence between them was the kind that doesn't need to be filled. At a traffic light, he turned his head and looked at her. "How do you feel?" he asked. She thought about it honestly, which was the only way she knew how to answer him. "Tired," she said. "Not the bad kind." A pause. "The kind that comes after something is finished." He nodded. "The boutique opens in 2 weeks." He said, "I know. The industry journalists from the show are running features. 2 of them confirmed this afternoon. I know that too. The Marrow family's fashion division has been asking about a permanent creative directorship, not just the boutique, the broader portfolio." A pause. "I told them to wait until you were ready to discuss it." She looked at him. "When did you tell them that?" "This morning. You were in the hospital this morning." "I had my phone," he said. She looked at him for a moment, the fractured ribs, the immobilized shoulder. The hospital called to his fashion division's board and shook her head slowly. "You're impossible," she said. "I've been told," he said, and there it was. The thing she'd been waiting without knowing she was waiting to see, which was something in his face that was not contained and not managed and not the product of calculation. Just the simple, unguarded response of a person who is for the first time in a long time somewhere they didn't expect to be and find they don't mind it. She looked out the window. 3 months ago, she had been sitting at a north-facing window in an apartment that belonged to someone else's life, drawing a dress at 4 in the morning because the life she'd been building had just collapsed, and the only thing she knew to do with that was make something. She had drawn a dress for a woman who had decided something irrevocable and wanted the room to know it before she said a word. She had not known then what she was deciding exactly, only that it was irrevocable. She knew now. The car stopped in front of her building. She didn't move immediately. She looked at the building's entrance, at the light above it, at the ordinary continuity of a street on a Thursday night. "Come up," she said. Not a question, not a negotiation. The same register he used, a fact presented in advance of itself. He looked at her. He said nothing for a moment, which was not hesitation. It was the pause of a person making sure they understood what was being offered. 3 fractured ribs, he said. "I know about your ribs," she said. A pause. "All right," he said. They went up. In the apartment. She put the kettle on because it was midnight, and she didn't want coffee, and she needed something to do with her hands for the 3 minutes before everything settled into its new shape. He sat at the drafting table without being invited, the way people sit in spaces that have made room for them, and he looked at the notebooks and the sketches and the fabric swatches pinned to the board above the table. And he looked at them the way she'd watched him look at the runway, with the attention of someone encountering something they have been waiting, without consciously knowing it to see. She brought him tea. She sat in the chair across the drafting table from him, and they drank tea at midnight in an apartment that was beginning to have history in it. The history of the last 4 months layered into the north-facing windows, and the oak table, and the notebooks that now held 23 pieces instead of 14. "My mother's name was Cecile," he said. She looked at him. He had never offered personal information unprompted. She kept her face still and let the silence invite what came next. "She died when I was 19, he said. "She was a seamstress. Very good. She worked for a house in Lyon for 20 years, and they never credited her for a single piece." He held the tea with both hands, careful of the shoulder. I started the syndicate partly because I watched what happens to people who make things that other people profit from. A pause. That's an incomplete explanation, but it's the true part of it. She looked at him for a long time. What happened to the man in the parking structure? She asked. The one from 7 years ago. A pause. He made different choices afterward, Damien said under some pressure. She understood this meant several things and asked about none of them. What happens now? She said. The syndicate. He looked at the table. It doesn't disappear. He said that's not how it works. But I've been reducing my direct involvement for 2 years. There are people who run the operational side. There are things I built that I can't undo. He looked up at her. I won't lie to you about what I am. I won't tell you it's cleaner than it is. I know what you are, she said, and she held his gaze. I know what I signed, she said. I signed it with open eyes. I've kept them open. She paused. I'm not asking you to be something different. I'm asking you to be honest about what you are, and you've done that. A pause. That's more than most people manage. He looked at her for a long moment. You deserve more than most people manage, he said. She looked at the notebooks, at the 23 pieces, at the dress she'd drawn at 4 in the morning that had walked down a runway in a room that had gone quiet in the specific way. Rooms go quiet when they're seeing something true. Outside, the city continued. The streets were wet again. It had rained while they were at the estate, and she hadn't noticed until now, looking at the reflected light on the pavement below. The rain had stopped. The streets were drying. She thought about Vanessa, who would be in a police holding room by now. She thought about Logan, standing in the middle of his engagement party with the decorations still up. She thought about Daria Voss, who had been discharged from the hospital and did not yet know what had made her sick, and who would be called by the compliance attorney in the morning. She thought about Marta and the atelier and the opening in 2 weeks, and the industry journalists, and Renata's mother, who had watched the runway footage and had opinions. She thought about all of it, and felt underneath all of it the thing she had not felt in a very long time, which was the simple fact of being exactly where she was supposed to be. Not because it was comfortable, because it was true. Because she had walked toward it through every piece of the last 4 months, with her eyes open, and her hands working, and her voice steady, and she had arrived here at a drafting table at midnight with tea and a man who had fractured ribs and had run onto a runway because the alternative was unacceptable. And the arrival was not triumphant, and it was not simple, and it was not the end of difficulty. It was just hers. She picked up a pencil. She pulled the nearest notebook toward her and opened it to a blank page. What are you drawing? He asked. I don't know yet, she said. She drew. He stayed at the table and let her draw and drank his tea and said nothing more. And outside the city dried, and the light changed at the particular angle it takes before dawn. And Evelyn Cross drew in the quiet of everything she had built, and everything she had lost, and everything she was still in the process of becoming. And the pencil moved across the page with the certainty of something that has been waiting a long time to be given the space it needed. And that was enough. That was finally more than